Welcome to 2018 cooking class. So excited to see all of your familiar faces. How many new friends do we have today? Okay, a whole table and a few here and there. Well, then I guess we'll do some introductions. I'm Jackie. I'm the clinical dietitian at CMH, and I work with Rhonda. And Rhonda's the diabetes educator. And then we also have Jared, who works in nutritional services, and he's our culinary expertise guy. So today we're going to talk about balancing a better plate. So starting the new year, oftentimes a lot of people have New Year's resolutions for themselves that might include healthier eating, healthier living, and so we're going to talk about just some things that we can do plate-wise that will help you maybe meet those goals that you've set for yourself, or maybe help you form some new goals for yourself. So as you can see, we're kind of set up the same way from last time, and Rhonda and I want to tell you that we did listen to your comments and suggestions, that we just felt like this message that we're talking about today better fits with this arrangement. So we'll surprise you next month and show you how we're sitting when you show up next time. But for now, we're going to sit at round tables, and the reason being is we're focusing on My Plate. So how many of you have heard of My Plate? Okay, yeah, so My Plate is often in the media. It's in our children's school curriculum. It was something that Michelle Obama really promoted in our healthy eating initiative. It's often on the media. And so this is really a tool that was, or a resource that was developed by the USDA to help Americans make healthy food choices for themselves. And so these healthy food choices really go by the Dietary Guidelines. And those Dietary Guidelines were set to help Americans eat healthy to prevent the progression and development of chronic disease. So My Plate is a visual way to help you eat healthy, and so we're going to really talk about that. And as you can see, everyone's walking home away as a winner today because you all get a placemat. So, yay! So this is something Rhonda and I really love to use in our practice, using these placemats, and it's a hot commodity. Everyone wants one of these. So we're going to kind of talk about this today in our recipes. And you'll also notice that our tables are set up to reflect that placemat. And so we just wanted to show you multiple different ways of how we can eat healthy and what that looks like plate-wise. Okay, and so otherwise the way that this is going to go, we're going to maybe talk a little bit more about My Plate, then we'll do the recipe tasting, and then we have some new fun giveaways too.
So it took a lot of expertise to divide those plates and get those strips in the right places. So we just want you to make sure you know by the time you go home this evening what My Plate is and how you divide up the different foods that you would put on your plate. So Jackie's going to be sharing some of that with you, and that's what our recipes are going to reflect tonight as well.
So I'm going to jump back to those dietary guidelines, which I just kind of briefly talked about. And what those are, it reflects a healthy eating pattern that consists of a variety of vegetables. So we got all of our vegetables, the more colorful the better. The fruits, especially whole fruits, it's grains, making at least half of your grains whole, and if you like white breads and other type of white grains, to go for those enriched kinds. But we really encourage to do half your grains whole. It emphasizes fat-free or low-fat dairy products, so that includes milk, yogurt, and cheeses, as well as fortified soy beverages. Also lean proteins such as fish, poultry, it could be legumes, eggs, as well as nuts, seeds, and soy products also. So those are kind of the big topics of what healthy eating is and what the dietary guidelines outline. And so Rhonda's going to talk about then that placemat and how that placemat represents those guidelines.
Okay, so everybody has their placemat out. And you can see that we take a usual 9-inch plate, and there's a guide there on the bottom that says a 9-inch plate, but you can also use a smaller plate. But this is kind of represent a 9-inch plate. We have lots bigger plates these days. We have platters. Sometimes we use for plates. And you can see that it is divided in half. And so notice your tables are divided in half. And so the half of that plate is supposed to be filled with those, what we define as non-starchy vegetables. So you see represented there on our placemat, we have carrots and we have green beans. But if you look to the side, you have a whole list of what we define as non-starchy vegetables. So if you look at that list, what do you see on that list? I guess that's on the right side of your placemat. What do you see on that side that is something that you would include on your plate? Everything? What one specific do you like the best? Jared, what's yours?
Brussels sprouts.
Brussels sprouts. Asparagus. Peppers. Mushrooms. I frequently get patients that say, oh, mushrooms are in there. I'm glad that's in there. That's a good one. Not on this non-starchy vegetables. Doesn't make it, it's actually on the backside. You have to wait till
That's
the
right.
backside. So these are the particular foods that provide us with lots of our vitamins and minerals, particularly vitamin C, vitamin A. So you want to make sure you're including those, especially those that have the water-soluble vitamins in your diet daily. So half of our plate is going to be filled with non-starchy vegetables. As Jackie said earlier, more color, the better. So you want to include, green beans and carrots and Brussels sprouts and peppers and onions and tomatoes. Nobody said tomatoes. Any tomato lovers in here? Yeah. Tomatoes. This is not such a good time for tomatoes. John.
You said for diabetic, peas are bad.
Peas are bad. So these
What
are
about pea pods?
pea pods that actually get counted over here in this non-starchy. The pea pods do. But once they become full-grown mature peas, it increases their starch content, and so we plug them in another spot.
I'm with you there.
Okay.
John brings up a good point that I quickly want to segment on. He said something about food being bad. And that's something that I want to really work on eliminating in our vocabulary. So if you see a food that's on here, that doesn't mean it is bad. There are no bad foods. There are no good foods. Food is very neutral. Okay, so what we talk about today is just going to be foods that really help you to achieve overall improved health, things that make you feel good. So I want to remove the bad and the good labels to see food as just being food. It's very neutral and it's nourishing.
So we may think of some foods that maybe have a yellow caution light, that we have to be more careful on how much of them that we might have, but they're not really defined as bad. They still have nutrients in them, but we may have to be more cautious on portion sizes. So we're going to fill up half of that plate with those non-starchy vegetables, and then the other half of the plate then is divided, as your tables are. You've got a fourth and a fourth, correct? Okay. So a fourth of that plate is going to then be where we put our meat or our protein portion. So we also see that on the bottom left side of the placemat, you'll see some different pictures of different meats. So what's your favorite meat that is listed there on that section? Chicken? Salmon. So it's going to be fish, it's going to be chicken, it's going to be pork, it's going to be beef. We also usually count our eggs as a protein source, or they could go in that section of the plate. We usually also allow that cottage cheese has enough protein in it that it gets to be a protein substitute, if you will, or a protein food. We also actually allow for peanut butter to be counted as a protein food as well. Now, that's not the only nutrient those things will have, but it has the majority of protein in it. So that's a fourth of our plate. So we usually try to think of, that meat portion being about the size of a deck of cards. I know you guys have heard that. Some of you have been around here long enough and you've heard Jackie and I say that. And Jared doesn't really like us to say that. About a 3-ounce portion about the size of the palm of a woman's hand. That's really what we need. We do consume more than that many times. But as far as meeting our nutritional needs, we can probably do with that portion size 2 to 3 times in a day, and that would be adequate to meet our nutritional needs. So then we have 1/4 of our plate left. What are we going to put on that last 1/4 of our plate?
Potatoes, rice, pasta.
Gummy bears? Who ever heard of gummy bears? Well, that's getting pretty close to that bad stuff. That last 1/4 of the plate is going to be where we put our starchy or carbohydrate foods. So someone mentioned potatoes, and what was something else? Rice.
Pasta.
Pasta, macaroni,
Bread.
breads. So we'd also maybe put corn. We'd put the green peas in that section. But you notice that section is smaller. It's not as big as that vegetable section where we put all those non-starchy vegetables. So in my view, it's okay to have 2 green vegetables on the same plate. You can do that with the big salad. You can do that with, asparagus and Brussels sprouts. You can do it with broccoli and Brussels sprouts, but you can incorporate the same colors even in that same section of the plate.
So that's basically kind of what healthy eating is, how we're able to do it. And if you're eating healthy based off of your weight trends. So we can I don't encourage calorie counting, but the way that our weight trends run, so if we find that we're losing weight, maybe we're not eating enough. If we're gaining weight, maybe we should look at what we're eating and kind of base it off of this kind of meal plan to see and ask yourself, are you getting those foods that are emphasized in that My Plate? So that's one way to kind of look at, are you getting enough, is to assess your weight over a span of time, as well as to look at that My Plate and see maybe where you're missing, where you're lacking, maybe where you can improve, maybe where you're doing really good. So enough about the My Plate. Let's get to tasting our recipes, what we have for today. We're going to start with a citrus salad with arugula, dates, and almonds. And so some general fruit tips before I really dive into this recipe. We want to include fruits that are whole fruits. If you get your fruits with your juices, we want to do 100% fruit juice. We can also do fresh, canned, frozen, dried. Any type of variety is just fine as long as we're limiting the amount of added sugars. So you're going to have sugars naturally in your fruits, but if we can limit those added sugars, that's great. So source of fiber, potassium, and vitamin C. The reason we chose this recipe for tonight was because I think it's kind of neat. I don't know that it's a very common recipe. It's pretty unique in that way. It's combining savory and sweet components. It also is something I pulled from the Mediterranean diet recipe book. So that's kind of a big diet. It's well known and it's well supported by a lot of research that Mediterranean diet is beneficial for improved health outcomes. So we're going to get into talking about those ingredients in that recipe. And we'll start with grapefruit, and then Jared's going to kind of sample how we're preparing the fruit in the salad. So grapefruit, to many, is known as a very bitter fruit, and often we contain that bitterness with adding salt and sugar to it, and so that helps to bring out some of that excess liquid. So with this recipe, we added some salt and some sugar onto that grapefruit to help bring out a little bit of that bitterness. It also helps to drain out just that excess liquid so that your salad doesn't get too soggy, because no one likes a soggy salad.
That's true.
Yeah, and you might be like, well, Jackie, you just told us not to, add sugars to our fruit. Okay, well, I do want to also note that if adding a little bit of salt, or maybe it's a little bit of sugar, helps to improve the palatability of a nutrient-dense food, maybe it's the grapefruit, but helps you eat something that's nutrient-dense, I think it's okay, and it can be included in your overall diet. So it's just about leaving room for limited amounts of added sugars. So we added grapefruit and we added oranges here, and Jared's going to show you how he did that.
Whenever you're looking at taking an item that's extremely bitter or sour, and you're wanting it to be a little bit more palatable, you don't really have to add a whole lot of sugar to it. It really doesn't take a whole lot, really just a light dusting over the top of those grapefruits once they're sliced and ready to go. And a lot of that sugar is going to dissolve out and leach into the bottom as you drain those and strain all the juice out that's left. And then you just end up with the rest of the pods of the fruit that's ready to go. There's two ways you can do this. Where one section is you're removing the rind and the pith, I believe is what it's called. And that's basically the white section that comes in between the rind and the fruit. Okay? You can just skin it out, get rid of all of that as much as you possibly can. Or you can actually remove the outer edge of the skin that holds the pods of the citrus fruit together. Okay? And it's really simple. There's no fancy way of doing it other than just getting in there and tearing into it, right? If you're not wanting to cut all of the fiber on the outside of it, which honestly is somewhat beneficial because fiber is good for you, right?
Right.
But in some people's diet, when they're eating something like this, it may cause problems just with chewing or being able to cut through it and get through it. And if you just take your knife and you've got to get the angle just right, you can begin to peel a lot of that white mess right off.
White goodness is what
Oh,
it is.
yeah. But if you don't want it on your orange, it's a mess, right? A lot of times you'll get these sections on your oranges where it almost grows within itself. You can just cut that away. Just cut that thing right in half and then slice it. And then you've got your sections ready to go. Okay. Now, if you're going to remove everything on the outside, you're going to cut just a little bit further down just to nick the top. And then again on the bottom, just to give yourself a nice flat surface. And it's really, the first few cuts are going to be experimental. Because you're really just trying to find how the fruit itself is lining up. Okay? I wish that there was a easier way to explain this, but when you're talking about fruits, especially oranges, it's really gonna change significantly depending on the season. A lot of times you'll have a whole lot of rind and pith during the winter months when it's not quite as good of a growing season. And then in the summer months, they'll be a lot more useful. So you've really just got to be experimental with it, really, to find where the useful part of it is and where the rind and everything else is at. So, and you're just going to do it the same way. You want to keep your slices as uniform as possible.
So would you cut the grapefruit in the same way?
Exactly the same way, yeah.
Now if you don't like the grapefruit, you can always switch it out for another citrus fruit. So you don't have to stay within what the recipe is telling you. Any citrus fruit would really work well. And I know that a lot of people are avoiding grapefruit because of its interaction with maybe a medication that you're taking. And so, you know, if you're going to do that, an orange would be a good substitute to do, or maybe another high fiber fruit. If you just don't like grapefruit, don't have any medication interaction with it, you can choose anything like a tangerine or a tangelo, which are going to be a little sweeter and they have more fiber in them. You could do a blood orange, however, they're going to be smaller, so you need more of them. You could also do pomelo. Did I say that right?
Pomelo.
Pomelo, yeah. You could do a pomelo, which tastes more like a grapefruit, but it's going to be sweeter and a more mellow bite to it than the grapefruit. So know that you have options. So any questions on how to cut the fruit or substitutes for that? Oh yes. Also in this salad you'll find that We have almonds in there. I think we just use regular
Regular
almonds.
slivered almonds, yes.
And the recipe calls for a smoked almond, and that would just add a little bit more richness and contrast to the fruit, so it might add a little bit more flavor. But if you're trying to watch your sodium, I'd maybe recommend not doing the smoked, because you're going to get a little bit more salt that way, and just going for the plain version of nuts. And if you don't like almonds, or if they're maybe too expensive right now for you, you can always do walnuts or pecans. You can really play around with your own personal preference for nuts. And then the Dijon mustard, which I want to talk about here. Who in here really likes Dijon mustard? Mustard is my favorite condiment for a lot of reasons. It's super bold and flavorful, and it doesn't have like any calories to it, and it's made of these healthy fats. It is a little higher in sodium, but I just think it is so tasty. And especially the Dijon mustard, so I wanted to provide you some tips on looking at Dijon mustard. So there are a few things that we can look at to ensure quality of our Dijon mustard, and that is the fat content. So if you look at that food label on the back and you see that maybe one brand has more fat than the other, that means that has more seeds to it, which means it's going to have more flavor to it. So the more seeds, the more flavor, the more fat. If you look at the sell-by date, the earlier that sell-by date is, the fresher and the spicier that Dijon mustard is going to be. So looking on the shelf and seeing if it was just put on the shelf the other day, it might be more fresh than something that was maybe put on the shelf a few days before that. And so those are some tips for that. And also you can, if you don't like the arugula, you can do radicchio, which is that red sort of cabbage. You can play around, if you just really like spinach, you could do spinach. Any other substitutes you think would
You could do
work well?
kale. Kale would be a little bit of a risk, just because by itself it can be very, very bitter and earthy. If you were to do something like that, I would add something with it, okay? That can kind of help with that bite from the kale. And it's going to be a little bit, a lot more coarse than what the spinach and arugula would be. So you may want to dress it a little bit further in advance and leave maybe a couple hours for it to set with the mixture of the Dijon mustard and juices and lemon juice and the shallots and all that. Leave it set in the refrigerator for maybe an hour or two so that it can kind of help soften up the kale just a little bit. But it would definitely be something that you would want to try prior to serving it at a backyard party with a bunch of friends from the neighborhood.
So, I think the takeaway message from this is you can always add fruit to your salads. It doesn't have to be a citrus, it could be berries, it could be bananas, it could be pomegranates. So just be creative with your salads, that, adding fruit, adding nuts really adds some extra nutrition to that food. So now the question of the night is going to be, where does this recipe go on your plate? If you were making this at home, how would you plate it?
Vegetable salad.
Vegetable side. Yeah, so if it's the base of it is that salad, it's going to go on that salad side. That fruit is what we consider a carbohydrate. So, for those of us who are maybe watching our carbohydrates, we do have to consider how much fruit we're adding and maybe just account for that in some other portion sizes. So, all right. Yay or nay to the citrus salad?
Yep.
Yay, okay.
As a keeper. So if you really look at the portions that you probably pick up, I think with your orange or your grapefruit, it doesn't contribute a lot of carbs. You really are having more of the non-starchy vegetables. So I would definitely agree that it kind of goes on that full side, half side of that, not full side, half side of that plate, those non-starchy vegetables.
So recipe number 2 is going to be our roasted root vegetable with lemon caper sauce. Okay, so again, I'm going to talk first about some general tips. And so we're talking about the side of the table that you're all sitting on right now, so the side that it takes up most of your plate. So this recipe, giving it away, I guess, is going to fill up half of your plate. Okay, so our vegetables are super important for a lot of reasons. And what I think is really great about them is they're all low in calories, low in sodium, low in fat, unless we add that during cooking. But it makes me really sad inside when people say they don't like vegetables because, you know, vegetables add so much nutrition and so much, you know, to our plates that can really improve our health. They have so much benefit to them, whether it's fiber, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin C, maybe it's niacin, thiamine. So there's just so much to vegetables, and if we're not eating them, we're really missing out on all those. So this recipe is maybe a little bit different than things that you've maybe tried at home, but I think that's a really great thing to do because if we don't like a vegetable, maybe trying it a different way, preparing it a different way. I read a quote one time that said, you know, how we like foods really has to do with whether or not we've been exposed to that food before. So the more times we're exposed to a food, the more likely we're going to like it. So really be open to foods and try new things. And so with this recipe, we're roasting some root vegetables. And so root vegetables are great because they're available all year round, but their peak season is between fall and spring. And so they're going to be the sweetest and a little bit juicier during this time of year. And they might be more palatable when they're cooked versus when they're raw, but if you like them raw, you can always do raw. With this recipe, we're roasting them though, and that really helps to cultivate flavor and texture. So again, I got this recipe from more of a Mediterranean type of diet. This is a great hearty winter side because it's using mostly those rooted vegetables. And it's also, it could be incorporated into one of those sheet pan recipes. How many of you are on Facebook and have seen those sheet pan meal ideas? So this would be something that you could kind of throw in a pan and prepare for your family and such. So before roasting though, maybe tossing our vegetables in an oil, a healthy oil, whether it be an olive oil, maybe it's canola oil, and that helps you to absorb those fat-soluble vitamins that those vegetables have to offer. So you can toss them in that oil. You could even add a little bit of sugar if you really don't like a vegetable and it helps you to eat that nutrient-dense food. Maybe adding a little bit of sugar, it also helps with the browning of that vegetable too. So with this recipe, we have Brussels sprouts, onions, carrots, and we also cooked it with potatoes, but we're going to look at that as a separate recipe. So, Jared, did you do anything special when cooking these?
Absolutely. Who here eats capers on a regular basis? Anybody eat a lot of capers? No? Exactly. One thing that I would challenge you to do, if you come across a recipe that just looks awesome, but you find about 2/3 of the way down it has capers in it, okay? When you buy the capers to use for this recipe, do not open up that jar and take a big whiff of those capers, okay? Because you're automatically going to, don't want it. Not going to happen, okay? They're not the most pleasant smelling thing out there on the market for cooking, okay? But with that, I will tell you that most people that try it in a dish usually goes really, really well with, like in this case, a lemon type sauce. We do a garlic lemon sauce with capers for a baked fish. That's fantastic. It adds something to a dish that most people will eat and not be able to quite put their finger on what it is, but they generally love it. So don't if you've never had them before, don't go and buy them and spoil it for yourself by smelling them before you use them in your recipe. Definitely try them in the recipe to make sure that it is something that you're going to enjoy.
A caper is a pickled flower bud, so
Yeah.
it's plant-based and it's been sun-dried and then pickled. So it has a lot of flavor to it. It's used as garnish and as seasoning. So it's going to be higher in sodium.
It's from the
Something Mediterranean.
juniper.
Yeah.
It's like the juniper flower bud, isn't it? So anyhow,
We have a
Question?
question over here.
usually with the pickles and the olives and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they have them at Woods. I've never looked there, but I know they have them at
Walmart.
Walmart. Yeah, Hy-Vee will probably have an array of them. Whenever you're doing any type of roasting, baking, anything like that, the most important thing, you guys can see these potatoes, right? Your recipe will always give you very direct instructions on how to prepare whatever it is that you're cooking. It'll say 8 medium potatoes, right? But you get a bag of potatoes from the store, and have you ever bought one that was all medium-sized potatoes? No, not going to happen. So basically what you have to do in that case is you have to look at these potatoes and say, I need these to be equal in size and proportion. Because otherwise, this isn't going to get done and this is going to be perfect, or this is going to get done and this is going to be overcooked, right? And you don't want overcooked food. It can spoil a meal for you, for your family. Depending on what it is, potatoes are very forgiving. So luckily with them, carrots probably not as forgiving as what potatoes are, just because they have a tendency to want to scorch. So whenever you're going through and you're trimming and cutting and doing all those things, just look at the sizes of what you want to cut and try to make every potato that size. Get an idea of what you want it to be. I would usually say about a bite size for something like this, like you're roasting these up in the oven. Just make them about bite size. If you have to take a bite off of the fork to get it all down, then you probably should have cut it at least one more time, right? Same thing with the carrots. You don't want them too wide. And you're going to cut the end of the carrot a lot different than you will the top of the carrot, right? Now this guy used to have another piece of him coming off this way, but somewhere in the growing cycle that didn't happen. So normally you're going to have this carrot be about yay long, it's going to be real thin down here, and you're going to cut about 2 inches up, and that's going to go in your pan to roast full. And then about from here to here, you'll probably cut it in half, and then the rest of it, you'll probably cut it into fourths, okay? So that way you have an even cooking surface for all of the vegetables, okay? And I believe on my recipe it was shallots, not onions.
Oh, I might have misspoken.
That's okay. And it's the same way with those. I pulled out from our shallots today, I had one that was, well, almost the size of this carrot. It was about that long and about this big around. And then I had another one that was about like that. You know, you never really know how it's going to look, but you just need to work with your ingredients to make them as similar as possible, okay? And during that roasting process, understanding the density of the vegetables that you're working with is going to make a big difference as well. Your carrots, your potatoes are very dense. They're going to take a lot longer to cook and become tender than what your shallots and your Brussels sprouts will, right? So you're going to cook those just a little bit different than you would the others. So that's why it tells you, I don't know if they wrote it in your guys' copy of the recipes, but it said to put the Brussels sprouts in the center of the pan, right? Because everything cooks and heats from the outside in. So that's why they had it like that, so that the potatoes are roasting and cooking long before the intense heat gets to the center of the pan for the asparagus, but Brussels sprouts. There you go. Yeah. Can you guys see that okay?
There's that picture of what
There you
he's
go.
talking about.
Yeah.
So you have the Brussels sprouts in the
Yeah.
middle.
Brussels sprouts in the middle, everything else lining on the outside. That will help to where you don't have to dirty 2 pans and cook them separately. Right? And whenever she was talking about the olive oil or whatever oil you use, that really is just a tossing it in there. You don't want it to be, you know, running all over the pan whenever you go to bake it, because that's gonna decrease your ability to brown those vegetables off and make them more appealing whenever you plate them. So just a light brushing over. If you have a brush that you like to use for basting or for whatever whatever you use it for, just use it with a little bit of olive oil. Brush over all the vegetables, season them up, and they'll be ready to go.
So did I convince anyone to be a Brussels sprout lover? Yep. Yeah, maybe? Okay, good stuff.
Yes.
What about, I use Pam spray. Is that okay instead of the olive oil?
So they actually have Pam with olive oil
Yeah.
spray in it that you could switch over to, and that just gives you some more nutrients in there, those healthier fats to it, where you're gonna get more of those unsaturated versus saturated fats.
And there's lots of different ingredients that you can add to a vegetable like this, and it's not going to add anything to your to the nutritional side of it, and that's just adding different types of dry seasonings. You can do some onion powder. You can do a little basil or oregano. All different types of ingredients out there that really isn't going to add anything as far as the nutrients go. But you can take a dish like this and you can serve it twice in 1 week and nobody would really notice because you've seasoned it completely different, right? And I think that's resourceful if you have family or other people in the home that you're feeding as well, is finding ways to use that 5-pound bag of potatoes other than just one way. And that's an easy and simple way of doing it. It's something that you already know, that you've already done, and really the only thing you're changing is the seasonings, just to change it up a little bit.
And so, want to go over how to cut a Brussels sprout? I don't know that
Yeah,
you had any,
I
but
don't.
what did you do with this recipe? You should tell them that.
I didn't have fresh Brussels sprouts available.
So if you don't have fresh, that's okay.
Yes.
We can do other varieties of them. like
Basically what I
frozen.
did is I had to use frozen. And I thawed them throughout the course of the day in a grate with a pan below it so all the liquid fell and it didn't stay on it. I just tossed them with the olive oil and the seasonings just like everything else, and then baked them in the oven. And the important thing was just keeping them completely separate from everything else, because the moment you go to tossing something like that, it's going to break to pieces. It's just the way that the freezing and thawing process works. It's not going to hold together well. And so that's why they were added to the side and not in with the carrots and everything else. But whenever you do have fresh and you're dealing with that, you'll usually have, I always look at it as a piece, as a little bitty tiny cabbage. I know that's not what it is, but you look at it that way and you've dealt with cabbage before, you can deal with Brussels sprouts. Usually there'll be a little bit coarser piece on the very, very bottom where it was attached to the stalk. You cut that at where the leaves begin to come up, and a lot of times when you buy them at the store, they'll already be trimmed right at the base of the fruit where the plant meets the stalk, right?
That's what he's talking about.
Cut
right
that
now.
away, and then just cut it in half long ways, and you're ready to go. Usually what I tell people is whenever you cut that loose, any of those leaves that fall off, and they are, you can bend them and then not snap, just pitch them. Sometimes the outer leaves are going to be really kind of fibrous and not very good. And then also, anytime you have those leaves that maybe weren't as, they're on the outside of the plant as it's growing, so obviously they have a lot of abuse that's taken place with the sun and the process of them getting from the farm to you, and so a lot of times they'll just kind of be wilted and just not very pretty. And so you can just discard those. If you want to eat them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. I will say a lot of times they usually have a lot of damage to them, just like I said, through that process of getting from the farm to you. And so as far as it being on your plate, it's not going to be as appealing. So very simple piece of, I actually found them the other day at Woods, I think it was, where they had the Brussels sprouts still on the stalk. Yeah, which was interesting because I didn't even know that's how they grew. And to be honest, I had no idea. I never really thought about it until I saw a Brussels sprout plant on this ginormous stalk that looks like asparagus with all these little bitty Brussels sprouts coming off of it. So yeah, if you buy them like that, then my explanation of how to deal with them and how to trim them and prepare them will probably make a little bit more sense.
So question of the evening, where does this go if you were to plate it up on your own plate? Where would you put the shallots, the carrots, and the Brussels sprouts?
Vegetables.
Any type of vegetable that is on the left side of your handout. Where does it go?
Goes on.
Half your
Fill up
plate.
half of that plate.
Very
That
good.
9-inch plate, fill it up with those carrots. And it's really colorful, don't you think? When you put those Brussels sprouts with the carrots. And then you've also had, while they've been discussing that, you've also had your portion of potatoes. And so those were roasted along with the carrots and the Brussels sprouts. And Jared, I've also taken those Brussels sprouts and kind of cut them in half and roasted them that way.
Yeah.
That kind of works okay too, if it's a bigger Brussels sprout, if it's a bigger one, cut it in half and then roast it that way as well. So we did include potatoes for those of you that think potatoes are a bad food. Oh, we're not supposed to use that word. We did include them, but you need to look at limiting that portion to that 1/4 of that plate. That's where we want to put that kind of thing, but we want to emphasize the Brussels sprouts, the shallots, the carrots, those other non-starchy vegetables. And they usually have lots of color, so it makes your plates look really nice there too. We're going to move on until we have that 1/4 of that plate left. Doesn't have anything in it, right? We've had half of it full, we had 1/4 of it full. And now we're going to move to putting our protein or our meat portions in that particular part of the plate. So Jared is going to share with us, we chose to do pork tenderloin. And so he's going to share with us some things about trimming that and about preparing that and the kinds of things we need to do. So you do have that included on your recipes, and then we've got a couple of different sauces, and he can also share with you the preparation of those sauces. So you get to try both of those sauces with the pork tenderloin.
Perfect.
It's our protein source. I know Jerry doesn't like my portion size of it, but really a 3-ounce portion is about enough.
All right. Who eats pork tenderloin? Now, a lot of people use pork loin, and then the pork tenderloin is that leaner. Usually, it's a little bit more pricey than the pork loins are as far as the poundage goes. And really, preparing it and getting it ready to cook is very simple. Once you understand a few things, pork, actually all beef and pork, lamb, they all have what's called silver skin, basically. And as you can see on this piece of meat, this right here has a thin layer of fat that goes over the top of it. And then it also has the silver skin that goes over there, right? And you can cook that on, but I wouldn't recommend it. Basically what happens is, as that silver skin begins to cook, it squeezes all the life out of your meat, right? And then you'll end up with a dry, crusty, nasty, gross piece of pork, right? Nobody wants dry pork. It's hard enough to cook pork and it not be dry in the first place, right? But I feel like that's why a lot of people have problems and say that they don't like cooking pork. It's because it's always dry. Well, if you've had a piece of pork and you didn't cut the silver skin off of it, try it again. Remove it. It'll make it a lot better and easier for you to work with. And really the best way to do it, right up here at the top, you're going to have a little bit of a fold with some fat. You're going to remove that. And the reason why you're removing the fat is there's two different types of fat. There is a coarse fat, and then there's a soft fat, right? The coarse fat, which is what this is not easy to work with. It has a tendency to act a lot like the silver skin does, okay? In drying the meat out instead of moistening it. Like with a lot of fats, it moistens the meat, makes it better. But in the thicker and the harder and the more coarse fats, it does the exact opposite. So you're going to remove some of that, and a lot of that fat that we're taking off right now has little strands of that silver skin embedded in it as well. And this is just, what I'm using here is it's what's called a boning knife. It works really, really well for dealing and preparing any type of meat. Okay, so you're really just going to rough up the area where the silver skin and the meat meet together. And that thin layer of, I don't even know what this stuff is. It's a pain to deal with, I can tell you that much. It's got a little bit of fat content in it, and it's kind of like the silver skin. You're going to get it removed out. Okay? And now you can have a better defined look at what that silver skin looks like, right? You can see where it's really starting to come together. And you're just going to get your knife blade in there. And you're always going to want to make sure you're working with a very sharp blade, right? Most people are cut by dull blades, not by sharp ones. Okay? And basically, this is where the tendons, is that right? Tendons attach muscle to bone, right? Okay. It's where the tendons are attaching the meat. So it's going to go underneath a little bit of this meat, right? It's kind of going to overlap it, and that's fine. You don't really need to cut in there too much further than what I just did. If you get in too far, it'll end up making a mess of it and not do what you need to. Okay. Right. That is it. Okay. Sometimes you'll end up with some more silver skin down here at the very, very bottom. Most of the time, whenever you buy them at the store, a lot of that will already be removed. I think a lot of butchers, you can even ask them to go ahead and remove that for you. It may cost you a little bit more, but it'll be one less thing that you have to worry about. Now, when preparing the pork tenderloin, you're going to want to season it with salt, pepper, garlic, any other seasonings that you'd like to have on it. It doesn't matter. You can grill it off. I would not recommend just taking it, putting it in the oven and baking it unless you have a broiler where you can brown it. Otherwise, it's going to look pale and kind of gray in color, right? You can do it whole. You can cut it into medallions, which is the way that you guys will have it served today. These were cooked whole, grilled and then baked off in the oven, and then sliced thin, and then the sauce is put on top of it for you. But you'll definitely want to put it in a skillet or on a grill outside. Grill mark it really well. Finish it in the oven. Use a thermometer. Okay. On this thermometer, you can see it has a. There we go. Where it gets thicker at, that's where it stops computing the temperature. So you want to make sure that you're temping in the fattest portion of the meat if it's boneless. If it's bone in, you're going to want to go to the deepest part of the bone, right? So on a chicken breast, you've got that bone that kind of goes in at an angle right in the middle. You're going to want to temp right up against that bone, okay? It's bone in 165. With this, 155 degrees is all pork needs to be, okay? Anything less than that, then you start having that risk of having adverse effects from it not being cooked properly. But it is very important to cook your meat properly and to use thermometers, okay? If you don't have a thermometer at home, I would recommend getting one. It's safer that way. You can cook things like this to 180 degrees and you'll know it's done, but then you've got dry pork and you've got overcooked pork. So as far as the sauces that we used,
I would certainly agree with Jared about having a thermometer.
yes.
Put that on my Christmas list because I had a couple and they weren't working really well anymore. So I put it on my Christmas list a couple of years ago and got one of these digital thermometers. I really like it. Use it even more than I use the others. So maybe that's one of the things we might have to add for door prizes.
Hey, there you go.
Digital thermometer. I think that can serve you well. And when we're talking about the pork tenderloin or any other protein sources, we look to those protein sources as being a good supply of our B vitamins and niacin. So we do need to include some of that in. And it can be animal proteins as well as it can be plant proteins. But we do need to make sure that we're including some of those protein foods in our diet. It also provides us with some of our minerals, our zinc. We get our zinc from our animal sources of protein. We also get, iron in some of our niacin. So we need to have some protein in our diet. We usually don't have any trouble getting enough. As Americans, we tend to have plenty. but we need to not also eliminate it from our diet, because then I think we're missing out on lots of good necessary nutrients. And an important thing is what Jared was mentioning in that preparation to make it tasty for us. And so I think as he tells us about the sauces, I think that will help. Hopefully you will like some of the sauces. There's two different, at least one of the two sauces that we chose to use with this pork.
The apricot glaze, very, very simple recipe. It's just, you can actually buy the apricots, like canned apricots. Usually come in like a juice or a syrup, just use the juice. Always check for pits, and then put them in your blender and blend it. Add the orange juice, the honey, brown sugar, and then just tighten it up with a little bit of cornstarch and water. And it's something that goes a long ways. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't need a ton. And then that way you're cutting back on the amount of calories on the plate by limiting the amount of sauce that you put on it. Because as you can see, it's a lot of sugar, right? With the balsamic vinegar reduction sauce, you can actually buy that at Woods and Walmart. It comes bottled. And basically all it is if you have 1 cup of balsamic vinegar, you reduce it by 2/3, okay? Always make sure you have butter softened and ready to go. And that's going to be unsalted sweet cream butter, real butter, not margarine, none of that fake stuff. And honestly, it will not bind properly if you're using an imitation butter or anything like that. Reduce that balsamic vinegar by 2/3, and then you're just going to take about a half tablespoon to a tablespoon at a time and stir that into it with the butter, and whisk it until it's just about the thickness that you want. You can get it thick to a glaze, or you can get it a little bit thinner as just kind of like drizzling on your plate. And it's the type of sauce that you can drizzle it on the plate and that'll be enough. It does not take a lot. It goes a long ways. You can also use like raspberry preserves, strawberry preserves to tighten it as well. And it just adds just a little bit different of a flavor profile to the dish. And it works really, really well with the balsamic vinegar.
So as Jared mentioned, using real butter in this, and you're using a really lean cut of meat, I think, in the tenderloin. So adding some saturated fat that would be in that butter to that, I think it could be a good balance, and just don't overwhelm it with too much whenever you're making the sauce or whenever you're adding it actually to the meat portion. You know, don't cover the meat up completely with it, but just add it so that it adds that balance of flavor to it. So, any comments on, I don't think we asked about the potatoes. How are the potatoes? Very good. Roasted potatoes are just really good and really easy. You leave those skins on, you season them, and you throw them in the oven is what I do a lot of. So I think the Brussels sprouts and the carrots, very good color combination. So if you put this all together on that round 9-inch plate, half of it with those carrots and Brussels sprouts and a little bit of potatoes, and then our pork loin, that's going to be a very, what we would define as a very balanced plate. And then we actually have the salad that we could do off to the side, or in addition to that half side of that plate. Are these recipes keepers then? Good? Okay. Very good. So we would like to again thank you for coming for the cooking class tonight.